because it's so interesting and in its sort of movement there. And I like the way you read it too. But this idea of like creating division in ideal women so that like separating them, it's just a really neat line there.
Yes, that's why I chose it. I thought it really stood out to me, especially as a part of being a part of the younger generation. Hello.
Hi everyone, sorry I'm late. Good to see everyone.
It's okay.
I think it speaks to like the pick me culture
Mm-hmm.
in now too. And I hate that people, use that as a compliment too, like you're not like other girls. And it's not.
That's how I felt too. Jemiah, did you want to say something? I saw you were off mute. Okay. All right, so we'll go on now. Okay, so this is going to lead to, what do we think are society's expectation of women today? So I know we often talk about, how women were treated in the 50s and in the 40s, but what do we think are society's expectations of women today? And I'll let everyone go first and then I'll give my input. So whoever wants to just jump in can just jump in.
I feel like I'll just quickly go first. I feel like it's like that super woman. It's like you got to do it all. Like you have to be stellar in your career, but also look great, but also make a good salary for yourself and not depend on anyone. But also you have to hustle and also like have a beautiful home and, have beautiful kids, but on your terms, but like don't hire a babysitter, but also like get every promotion and travel the world and just be like, I think there is a lot of pressure to just be it all. Like, and that's, it's like that girl boss, but also you have to be like perfectly put together and, do your career, but also have a perfect family. And there's not, I think it's like do everything. It's not that option of, do one or the other. It's like, no, you have to do it all.
I completely agree. Does anyone else want to give any input?
I think there's a lot of expectations around managing our emotions in the sense of like society expects women to not get angry or not show anger, that, don't cry at work and like to be patient in the home with children or patient with roles and caregiving and so forth, and happy in those, like to never show disgruntlement at those caregiving expectations. And so I think that's a lot of what Shannon was saying, but also like specifically oriented toward emotional regulation. And then sort of extension of that is like emotional labor that people talk about, like that women do for their families and for their workplaces and so forth. I think that's a big expectation for women.
Yes, for me, I feel like society's expectation, it really hasn't changed that much since the 50s and 60s, where women, like I say, I'm 23 years old. And so I have my grandmother ask me when I'm going to get married, when I'm going to have kids. And, back in her day, that was normal, but it's like, I want to do so many other things before I even think about, marriage and kids. And like, when it comes to careers, there's the woman's career. And now we're branching through, we're seeing a lot more women in those male dominated fields. But then once we get there, we're still silenced because they don't believe we know as much, or they don't believe that we know as much as them, or they believe we know too much, or we are know it all. Or if we're giving advice, they think we're being bossy. That goes to what you said when it comes to the emotional aspect. Us just being passionate about things turn into us being bossy or being angry, where it's just like, no, we just like being passionate about things. I'm just a human, just like you. If anybody else want to say anything, okay, we're gonna jump to.
Yeah, my bad. I was just gonna say, as a young man person who identifies as a man, I sometimes feel guilty because I'm part of that. That burdens about expectations for women, because I grew up around strong Black women, and a lot of them, juggled multiple jobs and was very active in the community, very active in their church and things like that. And so when it comes to like my dating choices, I've like had to really be very cognizant of like, okay, you're not like my mom, but, or you're not like as X, Y, and Z, right? And so it's like, understanding that because there is a different generation and because of, you know, my mother had to do what she had to do because she was the only person, right? Or whatever the case is, that my expectations sometimes needs to be more managed better. And also I need to make sure that I check myself and understanding that I can't burden other people in the way that they navigate, you know, the world. And so, and even in terms of like my work, right? Like making sure that I'm being cognizant of the way that I speak to my counterparts who are women and not like being overbearing or over talking folks or whatever the case is, because I have to check my privilege every time I walk into the room as a male, right? And so, and thankfully I have really good friends who always put me in that place. And so, but yeah, so as the only man in the room, I have to also recognize that sometimes I don't always need to speak. Sometimes I just need to listen.
I love that, Kate. And really quick, I think it's interesting though, thinking of what you said, like there's that whole male gaze and like male expectations, but I also think like what our society is like a lot of women also police each other. And that's like a really hard thing to even grapple with. And of course, along the intersections of sexuality and race and ethnicity and all of those other like cultural norms, but my immediate reaction when I think of what are society's expectations of women, I'm like, this patriarchal, that, like you were saying, but then if I think about it for like 5 seconds, I'm also like, yeah, like women can be complicit in, you know, perpetuating some of these expectations as well. And especially, I love what you said, Danielle, like this idea of like the higher, like the older generations as well. It's like the parents and the grandparents. It's like, well, these are the norms. And I feel like it's the most harmful and most impactful when it's like the women creating it and like, you know, really doing these norms as well. Like, it's like, I don't always feel it from men in my life. I feel it actually from like the women and like your grandparents and like all of those expectations of what it is to be a woman. Because they're like, well, this is what we had to do. So, you know, like, anyway, so I agree with you, of course, with like saying how like men are a huge part of this and the male gaze and like patriarchy. But I think it is thinking of like how we as women also like we police each other, unfortunately, sometimes.
Just to piggyback off of what you just said, like that is 100% true. A lot of women have internalized misogyny and they don't realize it. Or like when we judge, oh, why is she wearing that? Why do we care what another woman is wearing? Or like what happened at the Grammys with, I don't know if you guys heard, with Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. You know, they did a performance and it was sexualized, it was sexual. And so people were like really angry at them and explaining all these, like have a lot of think pieces. But it's like, these are grown women. If they want to do whatever they want with their body, that's up to them. It's up to you to monitor what your children are watching. So you know that your children, they don't make music for children. So that's the first thing. They make children for adults. So I think that's another thing, because I saw a lot of women attacking them. And it's like, personally, I wouldn't do that because I can't dance. But it's like, if another woman wants to make a decision and it's not affecting her, it's not affecting anybody else's safety, it should have nothing to do with me. I shouldn't have an opinion about that, because it's like, let her be free and do what she wants. Okay, now we're gonna go. So I pulled a few definitions off the internet about exactly, I have to move you guys over. Here we go. I pulled a few definitions off of the internet about what feminism is. So from the Oxford Dictionary, it says that feminism is the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of the equality of the sexes. From Wikipedia, they say feminism is a range of social movements, political movements, and ideologies that aim to define and establish the political, economic, personal, and social equality of all the sexes. It incorporates the position that societies prioritize the male point of view and that women are treated unjustly within those societies. Efforts to change that include fighting against gender stereotypes and establishing educational, professional, and interpersonal opportunities and outcomes for women that are equal to those for men. And right here, I believe this is the Webster Dictionary, and it says belief in and advocacy of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes expressed, especially through organized activity on behalf of women's rights and interests. So I posed the question, what does feminism mean to you, and what is your personal definition of feminism?
I put it in the chat, but this is always one of my favorite definitions, everybody, Danielle, is I myself have never been able to find out precisely what feminism is. I only know that people call me a feminist whenever I express sentiments that differentiate me from a doormat. And it's Rebecca West. She was born in 1892. She's an author, and she was an outspoken feminist. She's British, but I've always really liked this quote as a definition of feminism.
I'm sorry, people are coming in to clean and things. But so for me, I completely agree with what you said. I never even thought about it that way. But so for me, I would say, can you hear me?
The way they called me and said, oh, you gotta hurry up, there's a big stain over there.
Oh, no. No, it was a spill and it dried up.
Oh,
Yes,
how you
ma'am.
been doing, Dave?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing good.
It's been a long time.
This your office now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so for me, what feminism means to me is one, equality for all, because women aren't the only ones that are hurt from the patriarchy. Men are also hurt from the patriarchy. Men are taught, oh, you can't have emotions. You can't be a teacher. You can't be a nurse because that's a woman's job. You can't cry when you feel upset because you're a man. You're supposed to get over it. Or especially when boys are younger, when they're like 4 or 5, dads take away their teddy bears and their stuffed animals because you're supposed to be a man. He's 5. He isn't a man yet. And, I think the patriarchy hurts all of us. And my personal definition of feminism would be equality for all. And while, feminism that does aim more towards women, but I want everyone to feel like they belong in this society. Does anyone else have any inputs they would like to add?
I don't have it here with me, but another one of my favorites is I have a coffee mug and it says, give me a refill. The patriarchy isn't going to fight itself. And I like to drink my coffee out of that in the morning because it reminds me like, okay, today, what am I going to do to contribute to like breaking down the patriarchy? And it's sort of a pithy one, but it's like, yeah, this system is not going to dismantle itself. We have to do things in order to work towards equality and work toward opportunities. And so it doesn't just come about on its own. So that's like a mantra for me in the morning sometimes when I need it. But
yes, fight the patriarchy. I remember I saw a podcast maybe a few weeks ago that talked about it was just a group of men and they were talking to each other and they were like, why don't we ever talk about our emotions with each other? Why don't we ever, talk about these different things with each other? And it was a discussion online and people were saying the patriarchy hurts men too. And they don't realize that because I guess they benefit from it from certain ways, but they don't realize the consequences that it holds for them to always be this big macho, I don't care about anything man, where it's like, no, you can have your emotions. I'm really avid about men expressing their emotions because I feel like that could be kind of hurtful to just keep all your emotions built inside all the time. How will you express yourself? That's not healthy for you mentally or physically.
Yeah, and similarly, going off of that, I'm taking a course right now about international women's health and human rights, just like an online course. And I think for me, it like really raised the stakes with a lot of this too. Is just like 5,000, so I don't know if I'm going to get all the numbers, but something like globally, at least 5,000 women die a day due to intimate partner violence. Like what? And just really sad, like the health disparities, maternal morbidity, like especially, among Black Americans in the United States. And then, but across the world, the access to education to women is just, it's just like so sad for me to like, I'm just like hearing about this a lot and like domestic violence, but really, and things like that is like, yes. And it's the boxes that we like put ourselves in. And then like, if women try to get out of the box, like what is like the actual violence to put people back in that box? Like, it's like, oh yeah, it is like people not being able to express their feelings, but I think it's like one of the most leading cause of death for men is suicide. Like, and so the stakes of this are like really high as well. And I feel like sometimes I forget about that. It's like, and it's the wage gap. And it's like, there's that whole, like, especially mainstream white feminism. It's like, yeah, girl boss. And we're like, but it's so much more than that. It's like, wow, like people are dying, like due to disparities between gender, like every day. So I think now, you know, I just keep to kind of, it's not just this like mainstream definition of feminism, especially among like white women, which is like very problematic, but it's not just girl boss equality. It's like, no, like homelessness and how it affects women disproportionately. The environmental, like the climate crisis disproportionately affects women and children. Like poverty and lack of food disproportionately affects women and children. So I think for me, I'm just trying to, yes, it's like, how do we hold it all? Like we need to hold like all of the issues, but especially the ones that affect, yeah, it's not just like something that's easy to put on a bumper sticker. I think it's these other like, yeah, just the high stakes sometimes I forget, as well as like just the daily microaggressions and harassment.
I completely agree with what you just said, because it is a higher stake, and we're going to get into it a little bit more. Probably, I think it's the next slide after this, when it comes to what people think about when they think about feminists. We're fighting for those higher stakes. We're not fighting for, oh, we hate men or we want all men to disappear. That's not what we're fighting for. We're fighting because of the wage gap. Why do women make 70 cents to the dollar that a man makes? And if you're a woman of color, it starts to decrease even more. Why is that something that we need to look at for doing the same exact job? Like you said, men commit suicide at high rates. Women are having, what did you just say? You said women and children die at higher rates, or in poverty. You said they're in poverty in higher rates, and hunger in higher rates. So how can we use our feminism to fix those problems? And that'll lead us to the next section. If it goes, there we go. So what are some misconceptions about feminism, and how can we combat these misconceptions? So I kind of just touched on one where everybody knows feminists are always seen as the men-hating group. We really hate men. And then apparently, I was doing research, people believe that all feminists are lesbians for some reason, apparently now. So I think one of the best ways to combat these misconceptions is to continue to talk about it. Education is elevation. And so we need to continue to educate people on these issues. And so everybody, you can just jump in and answer the questions.
I'm curious, Danielle, you know, as a self-identified feminist, as you have introduced yourself, and you have also, you know, told me that you are a Black woman, because I can't assume by how you look. What does that intersection look like and feel like for you? Because I guess my study of feminism and some critical race theory, sometimes Black women are left out of the feminist movement. And so what have been your experiences or your research in this area?
So I actually had a slide on that. I can go to it now. We were going to talk about that next, I believe. So intersectionality. So we can just jump into that and kind of go back. So intersectionality and feminism. So if we look in the chat, I don't think Shannon, did you see the social identity wheel? Did you see it as well, Brooke? Did you see I can go back to it. So in the beginning of the program, I had everyone fill out this social identity wheel. So you can take a few seconds to just look over it and like kind of remember like where you fall. And so then I'll go back. So with mine, check. So I always start off the intersectionality and feminism conversation with Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony is often, you know, she's celebrated for getting women the right to vote, I believe in 1920. But what was left out is she got white women the right to vote. Black women were still left out of that. We still didn't have the right to vote. She also did not like Black women. She said, it was a famous quote of hers where she said she would rather break her arm before letting a Negro march next to her in her feminist walks. So that's one thing. I'm happy that she brought that up, Brooke, sorry. that's one thing that I often think about when it comes to, and you brought this up as well, Shannon, white feminism and how sometimes they take away from other feminisms. Like I've seen, you know, some white feminists, they're drawing like, you know, vaginas on the ground. But okay, but how is that helping us? How is that helping us reach these aspects that we're talking about? How is that helping us show people that this is not what feminism is about? We want the equal pay. We want to be, and women are more educated than men, yet we still get paid less. How is that equal? How come we don't have higher positions, higher CEO positions? So I don't know if you guys follow like the stock market or things like that, but in the I believe it's the NASDAQ or the SP 500, the women are, I think, less than 10% owners of those companies, less than 10%. And those are 500 companies. So the top most profitable company, 500 companies in America, and less than 10% of those companies' owners are women. So how do we continue to break those barriers? And then, like I said, when we go to the social identity wheel, I always like people to understand where their privilege lies. So for me, I am middle class. So my feminism as a middle class American will be completely different than somebody who's low class and deals with other issues. Hello. I'm looking for Blackberry. She's sorry. And then another thing, being my international, I'm a natural born citizen in America. So my feminism would definitely look different than somebody who's coming over from another country and trying to gain citizenship in America. Because also women who come over to America, they make even less than the men who come over to America. So they're making cents to the dollar. They're making like, I think what I've read, 5 to 6 cents to what the man is making. And I believe they make like 50 cents to the dollar. So it's really different areas that we have to focus on when it comes to the feminism. Another would be, so again, I don't have a disability. So I'm privileged in that area, but how can I help women who do have a disability and are experiencing feminism? In our feminists, often we don't think about, you know, dating when we're in different relationships. There's a lot of violence towards disabled women. I know there was a woman who was in a coma for a few years and she turned out pregnant. So what are we doing to protect those who aren't like us, who don't look like us, who don't have the same abilities that we do, who aren't our same age? I'm a young Black female in America. So again, my feminism will look different than someone who's older than me. My grandmother, she's 70 years old, and she often talks, like I said, she talks to me about getting married and those different things, because back in her day, that was what they did. That was you straight out of high school, you get married, you have kids. And she's looking at me like, okay, you graduated college, what do you? And so I have to like constantly having to try to explain to her, that isn't like my life's mission. Yes, one day I would want to be a wife and have kids, but that isn't my life's mission. So thinking about how can we reach older people and explain what feminism is to them. I hope that made sense. And anybody else can jump in and just talk about intersectionality and feminism and how it relates.
I can just say one small thing. I think you brought it up earlier about that idea of all feminists are lesbians, and that really came from like the second wave of feminism, and it was like a way for queer women to occupy space. Mm-hmm. But I think it's still continuing. The mainstream, unfortunately, a lot of the mainstream feminism, I feel like, is like middle-class white women and straight, cisgender, not differently abled and all of those things. And I think it is really important for the feminist movement to continue to welcome as well, like the queer members of the community. And a big part of that debate is trans women, right? And like trans women are women, and the focus so much on women and genitalia is unfortunately a lot of like a huge exclusionary part. So I think that's like, these ideas of, and we've talked about too, unfortunately, the exclusion of women of color and all of those other identities that I think too is just important. Like feminism is for everyone, like you said, and it's just always like expanding the bubble and trying to think like who's not at this table. And also like, yeah, trans women are women and are an important part of the feminist movement. And it's really sad that so often they're pushed to the sideline. So yeah, that's just my thoughts about it.
I completely agree about the silencing of trans women when it comes to feminism, because I actually researched that. And it really isn't a lot of research when it comes to trans women and feminism. And they're out there. They want to fight for us because they are us. We are women. We are women, and they understand. And I think they also have a different perspective because they once were men, and so they saw how society treated them then versus when they became women, how they were treated. And yes, it does play into the intersectionality, and that could be a whole different thing, but they can see the discrepancies that women go through every day on a daily basis just because we are women. So I think that was a great point that you included. Would you like to say something, Dr. Johnson? I saw you had unmuted.
Oh, did I? Sorry. No, I think this is a really good conversation. I think it's a really important conversation about intersectionality and privilege, and feminism. I was looking at my chart, and I was also thinking about education as a privilege. Oh, that's what it was. I think when you were talking about women who are immigrants to the United States or second generation or first generation Americans, I've seen this especially in my classes when students talk about their experiences of feminism a little bit differently, because ideas around like what women's social expectations are maybe coming from like their parents' expectations based on whatever country of origin, and then dealing with expectations in the United States and how those sometimes sort of collide. And I think it's a really interesting look at that, because it becomes this other kind of negotiation, and it's fascinating. And I just love when when my students talk about that and sort of make that part of their analysis of gender studies and feminist issues. So I think it's really important. And I think, Shannon, you were talking a little bit about like the worldwide health aspect of it, but just talking about like family structures and expectations around education for women and so forth is really interesting, because it does kind of show us privilege and what we think about. But yeah, I think it's a good, I think you've made many good points on that particular issue.
And really quick, I know, Valencia, you've been on other calls with me, and I've noticed that you said that you're from South Africa. And since we're talking about this, I don't know if either you're able to unmute, or not to put the pressure on. You could also be like, no, I don't want to talk. But either to put in the chat or just chat about what does feminism mean to you being from South Africa.
Hi everybody. Sorry, I came in a bit late. I'm so sorry. But personally, like feminism for me, a lot of people assume like it's only for women, but for me personally, looking at it, I see it as both men and women. So men can support women, women can support men. And for me, feminism is just like equality for both genders. Especially like with regards to like, I've seen it a lot in South Africa, especially with like superiority, and especially in like the workplace. So like the gap in the workplace, equality. But as an overall explanation, I think feminism for me is just like equality all around, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes complete sense. That's what I was saying earlier. Like, men get hurt by the patriarchy as well. I love this conversation. And actually, just to touch back on the intersectionality and feminism, my boyfriend and I were actually having a conversation about feminism, because I showed him my program about feminism. And he kind of didn't understand, because his view, again, was they hate men. And I'm like, well, babe, I don't hate men. Clearly, we're together. And so I tried to explain to him how, for him, his thing was, he's a Black man, so he's looked down upon, by society. And so I broke it down like, yes, but you are still supported by the patriarchy, because if you go to a high level position, they would rather choose a man than they would a woman, because they feel like men can handle things better. Because think about it, we've never had a woman president. Every time a woman runs for president, we always get those, a woman can't run for president because she'll get emotional and hit the nuke buttons. Who said that? Like, how many wars have there been? with all the presidents that we have had. So who's really the emotional one here, you know? And so I had to explain to him, I was like, so you have that one strike against you because you're Black, but I have those two strikes against me because I'm Black and I'm a woman. So when we enter the same spaces, people would gravitate more towards you because, especially if it's a man heavy space, they'll gravitate towards you because you are a man, and they'll probably look at me differently because I am a Black woman. So I think it's important to understand and have those conversations with your significant others as well, so they understand how it can affect you. And then I think we could go back to the misconceptions because we kind of skipped over that one. Okay, so please just give me some of the misconceptions you know about feminism, and how do you think we can overcome those misconceptions? Anybody can have the floor, just jump on in. Okay, if we don't have anything, that's okay. Oh, did you want to say something?
Well, I know how hard it is to have the silence on Zoom, Danielle. It's so hard. But I was waiting if somebody else wanted to jump in. But I think I would go back to the idea of action, like that feminism is both theory and practice. And so there is important work to be done in education and talking with others, but there's also important work to be done in the world. And I think that that sort of keeping that in mind as we move in the world is important too, in terms of like, what action can we take to, you know, not go like, not the kind of like performative action of the image of like feminists burning bras or whatever, but the action of like, how do we make real change for real women and make lives better, I think is important too.
Yes.
Okay. No, I was just saying, like, this is not necessarily misconceptions about feminism, but something I've been trying to work on. And, you know, I feel like we're always trying to hold a mirror to ourselves and really like do the inner work. And you mentioned earlier too, this idea, and we've mentioned like internalized misogyny. And I think like really looking at yourself and being like, why do I feel shame literally all the time? Like, you know, it's kind of conditioned, I feel like, as women to experience shame, and like you bump into a chair and you say, I'm sorry. Like these other things that for ourselves, like personally, I'm saying like working on body image issues, working on taking up space, working on like for myself. Like, and I think, you know, it's that whole thing of like, you do those implicit biases. I took a test and it was just like women and career and men and home. And it was like, what are the correlations? And I was like, yeah, women, career, ha ha ha. And then I took the test and it was like, oh, like you had extreme bias, like men towards work and women towards home. And I'm like, and I think there's so much, like, even if we think we believe a certain thing, it's like how our subconscious acts and how it manifests. So I think for me, like to continue to do this work, I've had to do some like inner work as well. And I think too, it's like, oh, like how I judge myself is how I can judge other women, even though I don't think I do. So anyways, that's like, how do you keep the transformation going inside of you? So then you can really be wholeheartedly like act and believe. Because if you deep down don't really, because you were raised a certain way, then it, or like you have these little parts of you that you're like, oh yikes, like why is shame such a part of being a woman, or not being able to be angry? I think that's, and then you're able to model it for others. Anyways, that was long, but just
that was a really good point. I really like that. Yes. Especially when you say like we are basically conditioned to have shame. When you say you bump into the chair and say you're sorry. I do that sometimes. I'm like, that's not even a person. Why am I? Or I say, excuse me, it wasn't even a person. So I completely understand. Does anyone else want to give any input about misconceptions of feminism and how we can combat these? Okay. Well, I would just like to end with an excerpt from Phenomenal Woman by Maya Angelou. Let me move you guys over. Okay, so men themselves have wondered what they see in me. They try so much, but they can't touch my inner mystery. When I try to show them, they say they still can't see. I say, it's in the arch of my back, the sun of my smile, the ride of my breast, the grace of my style. I'm a woman, phenomenally. Phenomenal woman, that's me. Now you understand why my head's not bowed. I don't shout or jump about or have to talk real loud. When you see me passing, it ought to make you proud. I say, it's in the click of my heels, the bend of my hair, the palm of my hand, the need for my care. Because I'm a woman, phenomenal woman, that's me. And I really just wanted to end on this note because we're all phenomenal women and we just need to continue. Thank you for the hand clap, I see it. And we just need to continue to uplift other women and educating women and men. We need to continue to educate women and men and uplift each other because it's hard. It can get really hard, especially being in America and with the president that we had for the last 4 years and his disrespect for women. It really showed how many people really thought like he did, especially when it came to women. So we have to continue to fight this patriarchy. And also, please follow us on Instagram, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Office. It is youbelongMU. And if anybody wants to give any last few, thank you.